In this video, we're going to cover Slate of Officers, which is also sometimes called a slate of nominees, a slate of candidates, the election slate, or the nominating committee slate. This term derives from the nominating process when a nominating committee is used. Some organizations have a nominating committee which nominates an individual for each office. The nominating committee then presents this list of nominees to the assembly before the election. This list of names is sometimes referred to as a slate. A natural misconception has arisen around this process, with some individuals falling under the impression that the names on this list are connected in a way that they could be said to be running on the same ticket, and that the only way to not elect them would be to offer an alternative slate of names. That's not how it works. When it comes to voting, voters do not vote for slates, they vote for individuals. So from a voting standpoint, there is no slate, only individual nominees who stand alone as candidates for individual offices. For this reason, there are parliamentarians who contend that you should avoid the use of the term slate and simply call these nominations from the nominating committee exactly what they are: nominations. Nothing more, nothing less. And for the most part, you can include me in that group. However, I won't go so far as to say there's anything inherently criminal about the word slate, so long as the members are perfectly clear that this list of names simply represents a list of nominees, with members being able to make their own nominations and with members being free to vote as they choose for each office. So let's take a look at an example of how that works. When the nominating committee nominates an individual for the office of president, that individual is merely a single nominee for that single office, and further nominations may be made for that office before the election. This means that any member has the right to make a nomination for the office of president without needing to develop an entire unified slate to cover all of the offices. Robert's Rules of Order provides that after the nominating committee has presented its report and before voting for the different offices takes place, the chair must call for further nominations from the floor. When the chair does this, members call out their nominations for the office, and they are added to the list of nominees. And during the election, members can vote for any nominee without regard to whether or not that nominee is part of the nominating committee's selection. And when the election is by ballot, voters can even vote for someone who isn't nominated by writing in the name on the ballot. Another misconception about the slate of officers is that they're a package deal, that, like them or hate them, they're being offered as a unified slate and that you should either accept or reject that slate as a whole. That is not the case. You can choose to vote for all of them, you can choose to vote for some of them, or you can choose to vote for none of them. Now, it should be noted that organizations are different and have different tastes when it comes to the nomination and election process. Some organizations count themselves lucky to find an individual willing to serve in office, and such an individual is almost certainly elected to that office. While other organizations receive many different nominations for each position and have to go through multiple rounds of voting to elect each officer. Some organizations don't have a nominating committee at all, while other organizations, in addition to having a nominating committee, also allow nominations to be submitted in writing before the meeting where the election is held, as well as receiving numerous nominations from the floor during the election. It is up to each organization to decide which process works best to serve its needs. Now, whether the organization uses a nominating committee or not, what happens if there is only one nominee for each office? Well, this will depend on the bylaws. If the bylaws require a ballot vote, then the election must be by ballot, and the voters can either vote for the single nominee for that office or write in the name of another eligible individual. On the other hand, what happens if the bylaws do not require a ballot vote? Well, some bylaws state that the election shall be by ballot unless there is only one nominee for an office, in which case the election for that office may be by voice vote, or the bylaws may state that in such a case a vote is not necessary. In any of these situations, when a ballot vote is not required at all, or when it is not required in the case of a single nominee for a particular office, the election is handled in the following manner. After announcing the nominee for one or more offices, the chair says, "Are there any further nominations?" When it is clear that no members wish to make another nomination, and when there is only one nominee for the office, the chair says, for example, Magnus Carlsen is elected to the office of president. If nominations for all offices are being handled at once, the chair proceeds to declare each of the offices elected in the same manner. If the nominations for the offices are being handled one at a time, the chair announces the nominee for the next office and calls for further nominations for that office. Robert's Rules of Order provides the following. If only one person is nominated and the bylaws do not require that a ballot vote be taken, the chair, after ensuring that, in fact, no members present wish to make further nominations, simply declares that the nominee is elected, thus affecting the election by unanimous consent or acclamation. With some organizations, this is their standard method of operating. The members review the list of nominees from the Nominating Committee, and as long as there aren't any clearly unfavorable candidates, they allow the nominees to be elected by acclamation, simply by not putting forth any additional nominees. There's nothing wrong with this approach, and there's nothing inherently undemocratic about this approach, so long as the members are clear that they have the right to make nominations. As one final note, some organizations limit the making of nominations to certain times or require nominations to be made through a specific process. So check the governing documents of your organization to verify the nomination and election process that applies. And always, if someone tells you a certain rule exists, ask that person to show you where the rule is written so that you can read it for yourself. That covers Slate of Officers.